Tripoli, Libya, June 12, 2016. 14:30 hours. The afternoon call to prayer was echoing across the city when a 500-kilogram car bomb obliterated the main entrance of Ibn Sina Hospital. 2 floors of the 4-story building collapsed, power was cut, water pipes burst. 30 wounded civilians, most trapped beneath the rubble. 14 for 5 hours. The first ambulance helicopter, HH-60 Pavehawk, touched down on scene, but pilot Jeremy Collins was unable to continue due to shrapnel wounds. Co-pilot unconscious, crew chief critically wounded, hospital staff either dead or fled, and there, in that chaotic, smoke-filled wreckage, stands one woman alone. Staff Sergeant Sarah Thompson, 30 years old, born in Ohio, Air Force flight medic. Just a medical bag in her hands, a destroyed hospital behind her, and 30 dying people in front of her? First casualty, 8-year-old girl, internal bleeding, pulse critical. Sarah's first intervention, 4-line established blood transfusion started, stabilized in 4 minutes. Second casualty, elderly man, chest trauma, couldn't breathe. Tracheostomy performed in 6 minutes. Airway secured, 15:30 hours. Sarah had stabilized 12 wounded, but 18 more remained. Supplies running low, blood stock nearly depleted, and she was alone. Last radio message. Thompson, backup is 3 hours out. What's your status? Sarah's response was ice cold and determined. Still working. These people are going home. 6 hours later, all 30 casualties in that wreckage would be stabilized. 28 would go home. 2 would survive in intensive care, and Sarah Thompson would become legend in Libya medical rescue operations. That woman now quietly calibrates EKG machines in the biomedical department on the 3rd floor of Detroit Mercy Hospital. White coat, plastic ID badge, ordinary technician appearance. And this morning, until she saves 67-year-old Robert Chen from cardiac arrest in the emergency room. Nobody knows that Sarah Thompson is a living legend. ... Welcome to Human Stories. Before we continue with this incredible tale of hidden medical heroism and the warriors who heal, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe these stories of life-saving courage deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. Detroit Mercy Hospital had been Sarah Thompson's sanctuary for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 8 days. The biomedical engineering department on the 3rd floor was perfect for someone who needed routine, precision, and most importantly, invisibility. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., Sarah badged into the hospital through the staff entrance, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and began her methodical rounds through the facility. EKG machines, defibrillators, ventilators, monitors, she maintained them all with the obsessive attention to detail that had once kept soldiers alive and forward. Operating bases across 3 continents taught to the hospital staff, Sarah was simply the quiet biomedical tech who fixed their equipment faster than anyone else and never complained about being called at 3 a.m. for emergency repairs. She was reliable, competent, forgettable. Exactly what she'd worked to become since leaving the Air Force 5 years ago. What they didn't know was that Sarah Thompson had spent 8 years as a flight medic with the Air Force's 47th Medical Group, specializing in critical care, air transport, and battlefield medicine. What they really didn't know was that she held the record for most lives saved in a single operation by a flight medic. 30 casualties stabilized single-handedly. In Libya, 2016. But records and medals were things Sarah kept locked away in a storage unit across town. Here in the sterile corridors of Detroit Mercy, she was just Sarah the tech, and that was exactly how she wanted it. That Tuesday morning started like hundreds of others. Sarah completed her routine equipment checks, responded to 2 maintenance calls from the surgical wing, and was recalibrating a cardiac monitor in the ICU when her pager buzzed with an emergency code. Code Blue, Emergency Department. Code Blue, Emergency Department. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Code Blue meant cardiac arrest, and while she wasn't part of the response team, her job was to ensure all life support equipment was functioning properly. She grabbed her toolkit and headed for the emergency department at a pace that looked casual but covered ground with military efficiency. The ED was controlled chaos when she arrived. Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, was leading CPR on an elderly Asian man while nurses prepared medications and connected monitoring equipment. Sarah positioned herself near the wall, checking that the defibrillator was properly calibrated and ready. "How long has he been down?" Dr. Martinez asked the paramedic who'd brought the patient in. "About 8 minutes total, Doc." "Lost pulse in the ambulance?" "We've been doing compressions since." Sarah's trained eye was automatically assessing the situation. The patient's color, the rhythm on the monitor, the efficiency of the compressions, details that most biomedical techs wouldn't notice, but that had been drilled into her through years of combat medicine. "Give me another round of epi," Dr. Martinez ordered. Sarah watched the medication being administered, the continued compressions, the flat line on the monitor. She'd seen this scenario dozens of times in field hospitals, and something about the approach wasn't optimal. The team was competent, but they were missing something. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah said quietly, stepping forward, "the monitor is showing some artifact. Let me check the leads." As she approached the patient to verify the electrode placement, she got a closer look at the cardiac rhythm. What she saw made her pause. This wasn't simple cardiac arrest. The slight irregularity in the QRS complex, the particular pattern of the arrhythmia, suggested something more specific. "Dr. Sarah said," her voice carrying an authority that made Dr. Martinez look up from his compressions, "I think we're looking at hyperkalemia. The T waves are peaked, and the QRS is widening." Dr. Martinez paused, studying the monitor more carefully. "You're a biomedical tech. How do you know about hyperkalemia?" Sarah realized she'd stepped outside her civilian role, but the patient was dying, and her instincts had taken over. "I have some medical training. If I'm right, the standard ACLS protocol isn't going to work. He needs calcium gluconate and insulin to shift the potassium." The room went quiet except for the continued compressions from the nurse. Dr. Martinez was staring at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and growing respect. "What kind of medical training?" he asked. "Military," Sarah said simply. "Flight medic. I've seen this before." Dr. Martinez looked at the monitor again, then at Sarah. "You're certain? 90%? And if I'm right, you've got maybe 2 more minutes before this becomes irreversible." The doctor made a decision. "Get me calcium gluconate, 10% solution, and prepare an insulin drip. And I want a stat chemistry panel to confirm potassium levels." As the medications were administered, Sarah found herself unconsciously moving closer to the patient, her hands checking pulse points and airway positioning with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times under much worse conditions. "There," she said, pointing to the monitor. "The QRS is starting to narrow. The calcium is working." Dr. Martinez looked at the improving rhythm, then at Sarah. "You were right." "How did you know?" "Experience," Sarah said quietly. "I've seen a lot of cardiac arrests in my time." As the patient's condition stabilized and he was moved to the ICU, Dr. Martinez approached Sarah with obvious curiosity. "Sarah, right? I've seen you around the hospital, but I had no idea you had medical training. Flight medic is serious business." Sarah was already regretting her intervention. For 3 years, she'd successfully maintained her low profile, and now she'd blown her cover in front of half the emergency department staff. "It was a long time ago," she said, hoping to deflect further questions. "How long ago, and where did you serve?" Sarah looked around the ED, noting that several nurses and technicians were listening to the conversation. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. 8 years active duty, multiple deployments. "I got out 5 years ago. Combat medicine." Dr. Martinez pressed. Sarah nodded reluctantly, among other things. Dr. Martinez was studying her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You know what you did just now? That wasn't just recognizing hyperkalemia. The way you moved, the way you assessed the patient, that was someone with serious trauma experience." Before Sarah could respond, her pager buzzed with another maintenance call. "I need to go," she said, grateful for the excuse to escape. But Dr. Martinez wasn't done. "Sarah, wait. I want to talk to you about this, about your background." I'm just a biomedical tech. I fix equipment, Dr. Martinez said firmly. What I just saw wasn't someone who fixes equipment. That was someone who saves lives, and I want to know more about it. Sarah left the ed feeling like her carefully constructed civilian identity was crumbling. For 5 years, she'd managed to hide her military past, to blend into the anonymous technical staff of a large hospital. Now, because she couldn't watch someone die when she knew how to help, everything was about to change. 2 hours later, she was recalibrating a ventilator in the ICU when Dr. Martinez found her again. Asterisk. I did some checking, he said without preamble. Flight medics don't just learn to recognize hyperkalemia. They learn battlefield medicine, trauma surgery, critical care transport. What you did down there was advanced practice, Sarah continued. Working on the ventilator, hoping he'd take the hint and leave her alone. Sarah, I looked up your name in the military databases I have access to. Staff Sergeant Sarah Thompson, 47th Medical Group, multiple deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya. Sarah's hands stilled on the ventilator controls. Libya was a word that still made her chest tighten. The Libya operation, Dr. Martinez continued. June 2016, hospital bombing in Tripoli. 30 casualties, single-handedly stabilized by one flight medic over 6 hours. That was you, wasn't it? Sarah turned around slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time. How did you find that? I have contacts in military medicine. Sarah, what you did in Libya, ... That's legendary. They still teach that operation in air. Force medical schools as a case study in mass casualty management. Sarah felt the familiar weight of unwanted recognition settling on her shoulders. It was just my job. No, Dr. Martinez said firmly. Saving 30 lives single-handedly after a terrorist bombing isn't just a job. That's heroism. Doctor, I came here to work quietly and fix equipment. I don't want to be anyone's hero. I understand that. But Sarah, you've been wasting your skills. You're one of the most qualified medical professionals in this hospital, and you're calibrating machines. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, remembering the chaos of that day in Libya. It's the weight of 30 lives in her hands, the exhaustion that came from 6 hours of non-stop trauma medicine. I left that life behind for a reason, she said finally. I got tired of making life-and-death decisions. Wanted to do something quiet, something safe. But you can't turn off what you are, Dr. Martinez said gently. When you saw that patient dying, you couldn't just stand there and watch. You had to help. Sarah knew he was right. Despite 5 years of civilian life, her instincts were still those of a medic. When lives were at stake, she couldn't help but respond. What are you asking me to do? She said. I'm asking you to consider joining our emergency department. Not as a tech, but as a physician assistant. You have more field experience than most of our residents. And you could save lives every day, instead of just fixing the equipment that other people use to save lives. Sarah looked around the quiet ICU, thinking about her safe, predictable routine of maintenance calls and equipment checks. Then she thought about the satisfaction she'd felt that morning, seeing the patient's rhythm. Improve knowing that her intervention had made the difference. I'd have to go back to school, she said. Get certified as a PA. The hospital has programs for that. We'll work with you. Sarah, talent like yours shouldn't be wasted. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the hallway. Sarah could hear someone shouting in what sounded like Arabic, followed by the sound of security being called. What's that about? Dr. Martinez asked. Sarah listened for a moment, her expression growing concerned. That's Arabic. Someone's very upset about a patient. They walked into the hallway to find a young Middle Eastern man arguing with the security guard, gesturing frantically toward the ICU. Sarah approached cautiously. Sir, she said in Arabic, what's wrong? How can we help? The man looked at her in surprise, then responded rapidly in Arabic. Sarah listened, then turned to Dr. Martinez. His father is the patient from this morning. Robert Chen. He's been trying to get information, but there's been a translation issue. He doesn't speak much English. Dr. Martinez looked impressed. You speak Arabic? Military requirement. I served in several Middle Eastern countries. Sarah turned back to the man and spoke in Arabic for several minutes. her voice calm and reassuring. Gradually, his agitation decreased, and he began to relax. I explained that his father is stable, that the surgery went well, and that he'll be able to see him soon, Sarah told Dr. Martinez. He was just scared because no one could communicate with him. That's the third language I've heard you use today, Dr. Martinez observed. English, medical terminology, and Arabic. How many languages do you speak? 4, only 2, conversationally. It was part of my job. Dr. Martinez shook his head in amazement. Sarah, you're sitting on skills that this hospital desperately needs. We have a diverse patient population, and communication barriers are a constant problem. As they walked back toward the ICU, Sarah found herself thinking about the satisfaction she'd felt helping the worried son communicate with the medical staff. It was the same feeling she'd had saving the cardiac patient that morning, the sense of being useful, of making a difference. Dr. Martinez, she said finally, what would it actually involve? The PA program? 2 years of study, mostly online and part-time so you can keep working? Clinical rotations in different departments? At the end, you'd be qualified to diagnose, prescribe, and treat patients under physician supervision. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. I could still work in the ed. You could run the ed, Dr. Martinez said. Your background, you'd be one of the most qualified emergency medicine PAs in the state. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, looking at the storage unit key she kept in her desk drawer. 5 years ago, she'd locked away her military life uniforms. Medals, citations, and memories convinced that she wanted nothing more to do with medicine or heroism. But today had reminded her of something she'd forgotten, the deep satisfaction. That came from using her skills to help people. The cardiac patient, the worried son, the dozen small moments when her training had made a difference. They all pointed to the same conclusion. She wasn't meant to hide her abilities. She was meant to use them. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the hospital 30 minutes early and went straight to Dr. Martinez's office. I want to do it, she said. The PA program. I want to get back into medicine. Dr. Martinez smiled. Was hoping you'd say that? I have to ask what changed your mind? Sarah thought about the question carefully. Yesterday, I remembered something I'd forgotten. When I was a flight medic, I used to complain about the stress, the responsibility, the weight of making life and death decisions. But the truth is, I loved it. I loved being the person who could help when everything was falling apart. And now I realize that running away from that responsibility doesn't make it go away. It just means I'm not there when people need me. Yesterday, I was there, and it felt right. Dr. Martinez nodded. Medicine isn't just about the technical skills. It's about being present in the moment when someone needs help. You've always had that quality. As Sarah began the process of applying to the PA program, word of her background spread quietly through the hospital, not as gossip, but as the kind of respectful recognition that healthcare workers give to someone who's proven themselves under pressure. She found herself being consulted more often, not just for equipment problems, but for medical questions. Her opinion was sought on difficult cases. Her language skills were utilized for non-English speaking patients. Her calm presence during emergencies became something the staff relied on. 6 months later, when Sarah started her clinical rotations, she realized something that surprised her. She was happier than she'd been in years. The work was challenging, the hours were long, and the responsibility was enormous. But she was using her skills to help people, and that made everything else worthwhile. Dr. Martinez found her one evening after a particularly difficult shift in the trauma bay. Any regrets about coming back to medicine? He asked. Sarah looked around the ed, where she'd spent the day treating everything from heart attacks to car accidents to domestic violence injuries. It was messy, chaotic, and emotionally exhausting. It was also exactly where she belonged. No regrets, she said. It's who I am. I just needed to remember that. And Libya. Are you okay with people knowing about that? Sarah considered the question. For 5 years, she'd been afraid that her military service would define her, that people would see her as a hero rather than a person. But she'd learned that the opposite was true. Hiding her service had made her less than she could be. I'm proud of what I did in Libya, she said finally. 30 people went home to their families because I was there. That's not something to hide from, no? Dr. Martinez agreed. Something to build on. 2 years later, Sarah Thompson, PAC, was running the night shift in Detroit Mercy's emergency department. She was known for her calm under pressure, her ability to communicate with patients in multiple languages, and her uncanny ability to spot critical diagnoses that others missed. The staff knew about her military background, but they also knew her as someone who stayed late to help confused families, who took extra time with frightened patients, and who never lost her temper even during the most chaotic shifts. She was still the same person who'd saved 30 lives in Libya, skilled, dedicated, and unshakably calm in crisis. But now she was also someone who'd learned to integrate her military experience with her civilian life, using her exceptional training to serve her community rather than hiding from it. Sometimes the greatest act of service isn't the dramatic rescue or the heroic intervention. Sometimes it's simply showing up every day, bringing your best skills to bear on whatever challenges arise, and being present when people need help. Staff Sergeant Sarah Thompson had learned that lesson in the rubble of a bombed hospital in Libya. But Sarah Thompson, PAC, lived it every day in Detroit, one patient at a time. The mission had changed, but the purpose remained the same: to heal, to help, and to use whatever skills she possessed in service of others. That was what she'd always been meant to do.